The envelope was already there at 9:06 a.m. Pale gray, sealed and placed dead center on the walnut conference table, like a verdict waiting to be carried out. I paused in the doorway. This was our regular Wednesday briefing. Same sterile conference room, same half-warm coffee, same view of the loading docks out back. But this time, no one else had shown up. Just him. Grayson Bell. The CEO's new son-in-law sat at the head of the table like he owned the building. Navy suit sharp as a blade, a smile that never quite reached his eyes, and that patronizing way he tilted his head like he was always about to explain something to you that you invented. He married into the company 6 months ago, was given a title 2 weeks after that chief strategy liaison, whatever that means. No background in logistics, no history in systems or security compliance. But there he was sliding me the end of my 27-year career at Halcor Industries in a single envelope. This isn't personal. Dana, he said flatly, we're just sunsetting legacy positions. Legacy. I was the legacy. I'd built Halcor's freight optimization system from the ground up. The code, the redundancies, the real-time rerouting logic that kept our trucks moving through hurricanes. I'd written my first algorithm on the back of a discharge form in the ICU while my father fought for his last breath. I closed our Series A with a fever and stitches in my side. And now, just an empty room and a man who didn't even know how to log into the terminal without IT. Grayson leaned back like the job was done. But something in me hardened. I studied him. Not the ring, not the title. Him. He didn't know the infrastructure. He didn't know how the system healed itself or where the recovery shell scripts lived. But he knew who he married, and apparently that was worth more than 2 decades of grit. I said nothing. Slipped the envelope into my shoulder bag. My hand trembled, but I smiled. Not the real kind. The kind you wear when someone tries to reduce your life's work to a liability. The kind that says you just made a mistake you won't even recognize until it's too late. Because the system he thought he inherited, it wasn't theirs to begin with. The first version of it, I designed it in the oncology wing of St. Elora Medical Center 3rd floor 10 years ago, right outside room 314. My mother was dying 2 doors down. And between rounds of morphine, she told me, "Finish what you started." So I did. And I signed it with my maiden name, Dana Whitaker. My mother was in room 314, 3 doors down from where I sat, with my back against the beige wall, knees pulled up, laptop balanced on top. It was 10 years ago, almost to the day. I hadn't slept in 36 hours. Her voice had grown thin, almost transparent like the rest of her. But when I told her I was going to head home to finalize the system's routing protocol, she squeezed my wrist with surprising strength and whispered, "No, finish it here." So I did. I opened the terminal, pulled up the schematic, and rewrote the final logic string between IV beeps and nurses shuffling by. The architecture was raw, untested, vulnerable, just like me in that moment. Then came the email from my legal advisor forwarding the temporary filing form. I typed in my full legal name at the time, Dana Whitaker. The name on my birth certificate, the name on my mother's hospital chart, the name I'd all but left behind. I clicked sign. When I looked up, she was standing in the doorway, pale hand resting on the frame I-4, trailing like thread behind her. "There," she said, barely above a whisper. "Now it's yours." She passed the next morning. I didn't tell anyone at Halcor. Not the CEO. Not legal. I showed up to the office the day after the funeral. I buried the grief beneath back-to-back status meetings and API updates. I convinced myself the sacrifices made me strong, that loyalty would shield me, that if I stayed late enough, skipped enough holidays, trained enough people who later got promoted over me, I'd be unshakable. But I was wrong. 2 days ago, I was labeled non-essential. Yesterday, my credentials were quietly deactivated. And this morning, I was handed a gray envelope by Grayson Bell, a man who still thinks distributed ledger is a science fiction buzzword. I gave 27 years to Halcor. I was there when our server room had duct-taped floor fans to keep the CPUs cool when the floor tiles curled up from heat in the winter. back when we hand-scrubbed data logs from portable drives. And now I'm a redundancy. They have no idea where Halcor Route 1.0 was signed. No idea what it cost me. All they see is what it's worth today. But value doesn't always show up on balance sheets. Sometimes it lives in a hospital corridor, in the final whisper of a dying mother, and in a name you never thought you'd need again. Dana Whitaker, the name on the original design, the one they forgot. He had the kind of face built for glossy brochures and product launch videos. Smooth voice, perfect posture, and just enough charm to fool a room as long as no one asked him to explain how a system actually worked. But beneath all that polish, there was an emptiness I could hear every time Grayson Bell opened his mouth. I remember the first meeting he led. It was a Thursday morning full engineering team present. The kind of session where whiteboards were filled edge to edge with modular flow diagrams and load balancing scenarios. Our logistics dashboards were running live system ops, humming in the background. And then he said it, clear as day, completely sincere. Have we considered building a routing protocol that responds based on emotional context? The room froze. Someone coughed. One of our back-end guys tilted his head like he'd misheard. I blinked, waiting for the punchline. There wasn't one. We weren't developing digital therapists. We were optimizing freight lanes and warehouse stacking logic for cold chain compliance. The only feelings our system needed were warnings when a sensor failed or a node dropped. It didn't need to empathize. It needed to perform. But Grayson, he thought tech should connect emotionally because it sounded innovative in a PowerPoint. That was his strategy, pretty words and zero depth. He had never debugged a failing rollout at 2 a.m. or renegotiated SLA penalties with a supplier. He had never earned his seat at the table. But he had the ring, and at Halcor, that was apparently enough. I began watching him not out of admiration, but caution, because people like him don't break things maliciously. They do it casually, as if none of it matters. He didn't see legacy code, he saw technical debt. He didn't see engineers with 2 decades of knowledge, he saw cost centers. And the worst part, he smiled through it all. Like experience was baggage and loyalty an outdated concept. If you believe quiet strength deserves a louder legacy, hit subscribe, because the next chapter isn't just mine, it might be yours. So when I sat across from him at 9:06 a.m., with that envelope between us, I didn't just feel insulted, I felt endangered. Because men like Grayson don't just streamline. They knock down load-bearing walls without asking what's underneath. And when everything collapses, they point fingers at the ones who built it. He thought I was outdated, disposable, a footnote, but I was the only one still holding the damn thing together. There's something steadying in remembering who you were before they tried to replace you. Before I became Mrs. Dana Avery on payroll, I was Dana Whitaker, the name my mother whispered when I won my first robotics fair, the one printed on every system schematic that kept Halcor alive, the name that never disappeared, not from the filing, not from the foundation. They'll celebrate you until you're inconvenient, my old mentor once told me. Then they'll forget you were ever there. So if that day comes, make sure they don't need your name. Make sure they need your signature. I never forgot that. That same night, over lukewarm tea and open source logs, I filed the paperwork to form an LLC Whitaker Systems Group in a state known for its rock-solid IP protections. I registered everything, the routing logic, the modular design framework, the encryption layers, the adaptive scheduling protocol, all of it down to the checksum routines. Listed, owner Dana Whitaker. No one at Halcor ever asked, why would they? They were too busy pasting their logo onto the system's UI and assigning managers to my projects like barnacles to a ship. I kept building. They kept assuming. When I married 3 years later and changed my name to Dana Avery on payroll, legal never updated the filings. They just assumed the company owned the platform because I built it while employed. But no one bothered to read the provisional application I submitted. No one knew that version 0.9 alpha of Halcor Route, the prototype, was finalized before I signed my full-time employment contract. I didn't correct them. I just kept working. Sometimes I wondered if it was all unnecessary, overly cautious. After all, I was loyal. I believed in the team. I believed in what we were building. I stayed through 4 downsizing cycles. I trained junior analysts who ended up becoming my bosses. I turned down 2 VP offers from bigger firms clinging to some outdated notion of loyalty as legacy. But the name Whitaker that stayed permanent in ink, even if no one remembered it. And now, as I sat on my apartment balcony, the gray envelope still unopened beside my coffee, I didn't feel panic. I felt calm. Not because I won, but because I was ready. They locked me out of the system, but they never checked who actually owned it. And when they go looking for control, they'll find a missing link in the chain of ownership. In that gap sits my name, quiet, lawful, immovable. Not out of vengeance, out of foresight. That's when the message came in. Just a simple email with the subject line, request for confidential conversation, Virelli Tech. I stared at it for 10 minutes before clicking. Virelli, Halcor's oldest competitor, the one we shadowed for every transportation contract, every logistics grant, every digital upgrade bid. We never mentioned them publicly, but behind the scenes, we tracked them like chess masters. And now, they weren't reaching out to Halcor. They were reaching out to me. They had reason to believe that I, not Halcor Industries, held the foundational rights to the Halcor Route Logistics platform. And if that was true, they were prepared to discuss a full exclusive licensing agreement with additional terms for long-term strategic advisory. No threats, no subpoenas, no posturing. Just one sentence near the bottom of the email. If you are in fact the rightful architect, we believe you should be the one deciding where your legacy goes next. My first reaction wasn't pride. It was nausea. I shut the laptop and stood hands braced against the edge of the kitchen counter. The weight of 27 years at Halcor pressed down on me like a wet coat. I'd sacrificed birthdays, vacations, entire weekends for that company. Slept in the server room more nights than I could count. Hand-built a logistics engine from within a collapsing warehouse that didn't even have heating. When the tech lead said my model was too unstable, when finance refused to greenlight real-time tracking because it sounded too futuristic, I kept pushing, not for the revenue projections, for the mission. I believed we could rebuild America's supply chain from the inside out. I believed Halcor Route could save lives getting supplies to hospitals during hurricanes, rerouting medications during wildfires. This wasn't just code. It was a lifeline. And now I was being asked to give it to Virelli Tech, our oldest rival. It wasn't about the licensing fee. It never had been. It was about identity. Who was I now? A discarded asset, a liability, a traitor? Or was letting Halcor bury the thing I built under jargon and incompetence, the real betrayal? I sat back down and reopened the email. Read every line again. They weren't asking me to hurt Halcor. They were asking me to protect what I'd built from the people who no longer understood what they were holding. Because Halcor wasn't Halcor anymore. Not the team I helped build. Not the place I stayed loyal to through downsizing, bad leadership, and every quarterly pivot. It was now led by pitch decks and buzzwords. They'd fired their chief systems architect over coffee and never even checked who held the keys to the engine. It wasn't my company anymore. It was a facade. So I took a breath-clicked reply and typed one sentence. If we're going to discuss this, we do it in person. Not because I wanted to negotiate, but because I was deciding what survived and what collapsed. The apartment was still. Not grief, not rage, a strategic quiet. The kind that comes right before checkmate. And this time, I was holding the next move. Most companies get sloppy with contracts once a product starts performing. They confuse longevity with ownership, especially when the person who built the system still shows up on time, still patches bugs before anyone notices, and still trains the interns with a tired smile. Halcor was no different. They took my ongoing support as passive loyalty. They never realized every bit of access I granted was intentional, a courtesy, not a given. They never thought to ask what exactly I owned. I opened the original licensing agreement and scrolled straight to page 14. Subsection C, legal considerations in successor licensing. There, it was perfectly intact. Clause 11.3 non-transferability without original architect consent. No licensing rights derivative frameworks, third-party integrations, sub-licensing vendor transfers, or expansions regarding the Halcor root core system may be executed or renewed without written approval and biometric authorization from the original system architect defined in Article 2.1 and A as Dana Whitaker. I stared at the clause, not surprised, just quietly satisfied at how cleanly it had held. I drafted that clause myself back in 2012, long before our exec team understood what the Halcor root engine could become. They thought I was being thorough. They were thrilled I took the legal stuff off their plates while they chased down Series B funding. No one redlined it, no one flagged it. And now, that clause? It wasn't a footnote, it was a failsafe. A legal kill switch disguised as structure. If Halcor tried to sublicense, expand, repackage, or even renew access to Halcor root without me, the contracts would collapse on signature. Vendors would be in breach. Investors would be exposed. And the best part, they had no idea. They never revisited the agreement. They assumed ownership was about brand authority and salary bands, not authorship. They thought firing me severed my connection to the system. But systems, real ones, don't operate that way. Not the ones designed to last, not the ones built for resilience. I clicked save on the updated review copy and closed the file. My pulse didn't race. I wasn't angry. I wasn't grieving. I was ready, because the only thing more dangerous than a woman who's been underestimated is one who remembers every single clause she wrote. The rain had stopped just as I stepped out of the car, sidewalk still glossy with reflections. The Varelli Tech building ahead, minimalist, quiet, confident. Built for thinkers, not tourists. 10:00 a.m. sharp, Monday morning. I walked in with nothing but a leather folder and the truth. No assistant, no attorney, no script. And still they greeted me like they'd been briefed down to my middle name. I was guided through 2 layers of security, my visitor badge clipped to the edge of my blazer like an afterthought. The elevator doors opened directly onto the executive floor glass walls, neutral tones, and the kind of silence that meant decisions were made here, not performed. No branding, no oversized logos, just a single walnut table inside a minimalist conference room and one folder waiting at its center. 2 people stood when I entered Varelli Tech's general counsel and their head of strategic development. No flashy introductions, no pitch, just calm precision. They didn't try to sell me anything, and that's how I knew they'd read everything. I sat open the folder and scanned the first page. The licensing agreement was clear, airtight. Exclusive rights to Halcor root fully attributed to Whitaker Systems Group. Contract value $920 million across 10 years with provisions for renewal and expansion. Non-negotiable clause. No derivative work or structural modifications without the written authorization of the chief technical steward listed in bold as Dana Whitaker, senior IP consultant. They had done their homework. I reached for the pen. My signature was smooth, exact. No hesitation, no explanation. Because this wasn't a sale. It was a restoration. I wasn't here to cash in. I wasn't here for revenge. I was giving my system the future it deserved, far from the rot of shortcuts, ego, and mediocrity that had infected the company I once called home. There were no cameras, no celebration, just 2 subtle nods and a stillness so absolute it felt reverent. As I walked out, nothing in me shook. Not a breath wasted on imagining Halcor's collapse or Grayson Bell's face when the truth hit. I didn't need that, because Halcor would discover it on their own. They'd attempt a rollout of Halcor root under a new interface, and it would fail instantly. They'd hit Clause 11.3 buried in a decade-old agreement, and legal would call an emergency meeting. Executives would panic. Someone would tear through physical archives and encrypted drives looking for the missing link in the licensing chain. And somewhere in that scramble, a name they hadn't spoken in years would rise from the margins. Dana Whitaker. The woman who signed once, walked away without a sound, and took everything that mattered with her on her own terms. Liberation doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it arrives quietly, like the final stroke of ink on paper, or the release of something you carried too long. By 7:42 a.m. the next Wednesday, Halcor's homepage had changed. The banner headline was gone, no Halcor Root Global launch, no replacement, just silence. And someone was watching. The Halcor homepage had changed. The flashy headline, Halcor Root 3.0 nationwide rollout. This quarter vanished without a trace. In its place, a recycled quote from a 3-year-old case study about logistics modernization, vague and utterly forgettable. But the real message was buried in the source code. A single line hidden to the public, written by a frazzled admin or panicked developer. Temporarily removed for internal review. The panic had begun. At 9:06 a.m., a leaked internal memo hit a private industry Slack channel. Halcor's legal department had issued an executive-level audit of every licensing agreement tied to the Halcor Root platform. At the top, urgent, confidential, immediate action required. At 10:21, my phone buzzed. A simple message from an old friend in corporate finance. "You didn't tell them, did you?" I didn't reply. I didn't need to. By noon, the internal fractures began to widen. The CEO called an emergency meeting. Compliance pulled old NDAs and vendor contracts. Mid-level managers frantically searched Outlook archives, digging up emails from 10-15 years ago, trying to trace how the foundation had slipped from under them. Then came the hit they weren't ready for. At 2:12 p.m., an institutional investor, Burnham & Klein Partners Halcor's second largest, filed a formal notice of immediate capital withdrawal. Not a warning, not a delay tactic, a cold clinical extraction. $84 million gone in under 2 hours. Silently, irreversibly. It didn't make headlines yet, but I could feel the pressure drop, like someone had opened the emergency exit mid-flight. People were scrambling. Someone was finally asking the question they should have asked years ago: who actually owns the system? That night, as I folded laundry in my quiet apartment, a new message came in. A name I hadn't seen in 8 years. Evelyn Shaw. Once Halcor's VP of Strategic Growth. The same woman who once told a conference audience I was brilliant but too traditional to lead innovation in this decade. Her message was just 2 lines. Is it true the patent was never ours? That you still hold the core license? I read it twice. No apology, no remorse, just fear thinly veiled as curiosity. I didn't answer, because the answer was already unraveling in real time. Halcor Root was locked. Clause 11.3 was ironclad. And every investor with a calculator and a conscience would soon realize the crown jewel of Halcor's future. It wasn't theirs to sell. They fired me thinking I was disposable, but they never stopped to ask who had built the foundation they were standing on. And now they were watching the walls crack, one timestamp, one clause, one signature at a time. The file landed in my inbox at exactly 7:15 p.m. No subject line, no message. Just a single audio file attached: internal exec call, recording was 7:12 MP3. I almost deleted it. Then I checked the metadata. Forwarded by Jordan Campbell. Jordan was a systems engineer I'd mentored right out of grad school. Smart, humble, and sharper than most of the managers twice his age. I remembered the day he asked me how to document his work without getting overridden in group credit. I told him always keep receipts quietly. I clicked play. The first few seconds were muffled chairs, scraping, someone coughing, a mic adjusting. But then Grayson Bell's voice came through, unmistakable and panicked. Wait! She used her maiden name. A beat of silence. I thought legal registered the IP under Avery. Who missed that? Who the hell approved that contract? Then came a second voice. Lower, calm, cold. The CEO. It wasn't our filing. It predates her employment contract. We only have derivative rights. She owns the core. Another pause. Heavier. Like someone just realized they'd triggered something they couldn't walk back. So, we don't actually own Halcor Root, Grayson again. the disbelief turning into full-on dread. Not the core engine, the CEO replied. Not without her biometric authorization. Then another silence, this one total. Not from tech failure, but from a failure of understanding. Grayson's voice returned higher, frantic now. No one thought to check her original filings. Seriously? Her maiden name. Who approved skipping that silence again? The kind that drags the room down with it. I didn't laugh. I didn't cry. I just stepped onto my balcony. The sky was fading into slate blue with streaks of burnt orange clinging to the horizon. I pressed my phone to my chest like it might soften the space that used to ache. In my other hand, a cup of chamomile tea. Still fragrant. Cooling fast. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even satisfaction. It was something colder, validation. They erased me in boardrooms, scrubbed me from pitch decks, referred to my contributions in past tense while I was still in the building. And now, they were unraveling not because I struck back, but because they never bothered to read the fine print beside the name they stopped saying. They fired Dinah Avery, the quiet lead, the over-delivering engineer. But it was Dina Whitaker, the architect, the owner, they never saw coming. That signature wasn't for them. It was for the system I built. And for the woman who finally remembered her worth. So I sipped my tea, let the breeze move across my face, and smiled, not with victory, but with clarity. You can't fire what you never owned. And you can't bury a name that never needed your permission to live. The house lights dimmed across the main auditorium as the keynote panel was introduced. I stood just behind the curtain, heart-steady heels anchored on polished wood. I'd spoken at conferences before back when I still wore a Halcor badge, and my name, if it appeared at all, was buried under job titles and acronyms. But this time was different. A soft chime echoed as the panel slide appeared. Then the moderator's voice. Joining us now is the architect behind one of the most resilient logistics cores in modern infrastructure, recently licensed to Virelli Tech. Please welcome Dana Whitaker. The doors opened. I stepped out flanked by two of Virelli's senior engineers, both women I'd mentored years ago when they were just interns learning how to debug under pressure. Now they were leading teams of their own. Brilliant, sharp, fearless. At center stage, 4 chairs waited each with a brushed steel nameplate. When I reached mine, I paused just for a second. There it was. Dana Whitaker, creator of the Halcor Root core system. Not contributor. Not co-lead. Not from the original team. Creator. I took my seat. Spine tall, chin steady. The panel discussion was insightful, forward-facing. We spoke of autonomous frameworks, ethics in data handling, and the future of real-time logistics in a post-quantum era. I answered 2 questions with technical precision, one with warmth, and one about attribution, with a silence so calm the crowd leaned forward listening for more. Afterward, a line formed near the stage. Mostly young engineers. Mostly women. One in particular stood out, maybe 24 oversized glasses. Press badge twisted on her lanyard. When she reached me, she didn't extend a hand. She leaned in and whispered, "They used to say you were just part of the team. But now I know you were the system itself." I didn't answer with words. I just nodded. Because she was right. They had fired Dana Avery. They had forgotten Dana Whitaker. But systems remember their foundations. And real legacies don't vanish when someone edits your name off the org chart. They rise when you do. If this story spoke to you even for a moment, leave a comment, share your silence, your fight to be seen. Like if you've ever had your name removed from your own work. And subscribe for more stories like this because somewhere out there, someone is rebuilding their name from the ground up. And we'll be here to witness it. If you've made it to the end of my story, thank you. I didn't share this for revenge or applause. I shared it because I know I'm not the only one who's ever been erased. If you've ever been overlooked, passed over, silenced, or quietly replaced by someone who didn't build what you did, you're not alone. I want to hear from you. Leave a comment below. Tell me your story, your silence, your moment of clarity. Because every time someone stands up and says, "That was mine," we make it harder for the next person to be erased. To those watching, never underestimate the power of keeping the receipts, the emails, the drafts, the signatures, and never forget that your name matters, even if they try to bury it beneath someone else's title. Protect your work, your worth, and your voice, especially when no one else is. And if this story meant something to you, like it, share it, and most of all, subscribe, because someone else out there is building their life's work in silence, wondering if they matter. They do. You do. And I'll be here telling stories that remind us exactly why.